In video game production, before any final game animations are created, the exact visual style of the game should be established via at least one very polished mock-up depicting an entire game screen. This mock-up image can be loaded into ProMotion NG by choosing File, Load Image from the menu, or by dragging the file icon into ProMotion NG's canvas area, or by dragging the image file icon onto ProMotion NG's icon. Now let's create a new animation layer which we will be drawing on to create an explosion animation. By working on this new layer, we'll ensure our new animation isn't being drawn into the background pixels. Just click the Add New Animation Layer icon at the bottom left of the Layers palette. Double-click the new layer you've just created to rename it. Now you can draw into this layer with the left mouse button, and the right mouse button will erase back to transparent pixels, revealing the background mock-up image layer. If you know how many frames you will be using for your animation, you can choose Animation, Number of Frames in the menu, set the number of frames, and then click OK. You'll now see your frames represented in the timeline area at the bottom left of the screen. You can left-click on any of the frame icons to go to that frame, or you can use the 1 and 2 keys above the letter keys on your keyboard to go forward or back a frame. Notice when viewing these new frames they are all blank. To make the mock-up image layer show up as a background for all animation frames, go back to the very first frame, right-click on the layer in the Layers palette, and choose Turn into Image. Now this layer is visible behind all frames. Another way to add frames is to choose Frame Insert Copy or Frame Insert Empty from the menu. This can even be done before you've added any other frames using the other method. By default, pressing the Insert key on the keyboard will also add a new frame to your animation, which will be a copy of the currently selected frame. We suggest you choose File Keyboard Shortcuts in the menu and set a custom key or key combination for inserting an empty frame, as it's a very commonly used feature in a good animation workflow. You can also right-click on any frame icon in the timeline area to access the same options to add empty or copied frames. And finally, another way to create a copy of a frame is to hold the Alt key and right-click and drag on one of the frame icons. Now that you know how to set a background image layer and insert frames, use the basic drawing tools as well as brush grabbing and manipulation features discussed in a previous video, along with the 1 and 2 key to advance or go back a frame and start to create a rough version of your animation. Very important, as you make progress, be sure to save frequently. If you're creating an animation or image using layers, you must save your work as a project as opposed to an animation or image file. Only once you've completely finished with your animation should you also save the final version as an animation file. We recommend you use a file versioning system to store your work so you can always revert back to previous versions of your file if the need arises. You can also choose File Preferences, and in the Project Defaults tab you can set ProMotion to auto-save backups of your work at any frequency you'd like. Once the animation is roughed in, now is a good time to set an appropriate animation speed for the frames. Just click the small FPS icon at the bottom right of the screen, and then set the amount of time the currently selected frame, all frames, or a range of frames you designate will each be displayed. In this case, set all frames to display at a speed of 10 FPS by entering 10 in the FPS settings, and then clicking All, and then the OK button. Test the playback speed by playing your animation by pressing the 4 key on your keyboard above the letter keys. You can stop playing the animation by pressing the Escape key. It will be easier to assess and perfect the animation if we add several empty frames to the end of the animation, so we can more easily distinguish where the animation begins and ends while it's playing. To do so, choose Animation, Insert Frames, then set the number of frames you want to add and click OK. In this particular animation, the gray colors used for the smoke of the explosion are getting lost in the same gray colors used in the platform in the mock-up image. For this reason, create a new image layer under the animation layer. Draw a rectangle behind the explosion to hide the mock-up layer, then drag the opacity of this new layer until you can see the background image but can still see the smoke of the explosion clearly. Now go back to the animation layer and begin the final detailing and cleaning process. Constantly flip forward and backward through the timeline with the 1 and 2 keys to make sure each frame transitions nicely to the next, and that no shapes remain static between any frames. For explosion frames, the smear drawing mode can be useful to push and distort areas in a somewhat random way. Once you're happy with your animation, save the project file one last time, and now you're ready to isolate, crop, and save out just the explosion as a separate animation file. Hide the other layers so only the explosion and its transparent background are showing. Then use the cropping tool to crop fairly close to the explosion animation, being sure to not accidentally crop out actual artwork from any of the frames. Now hold Ctrl and press the Delete key and delete frames ranging from 11 to 15. This will remove the 5 empty frames we had added previously. Now all that's left to do is choose File, Save Animation As from the menu, choose the animation file format you'd like to use, make sure the export process is not including any of the invisible layers or effects, and save your finished animation file. This video covered only some of the most basic and most commonly used features and workflow for creating animations in ProMotion NG. The onion skinning feature will be covered in the next video. One final note before we wrap up this tutorial. By selecting any frame in the timeline by left-clicking on its icon, then left-clicking and dragging, you can shift its position in the timeline. In this example, we're swapping frame 6 with frame 5 and then back again. We hope you found this tutorial helpful. Thanks very much for watching.